Election officials across the country really are being forced to a new level of high alert after a string of suspicious letters were mailed to election offices in at least 6 states. Some of the letters mailed to Washington state contained fentanyl. You see all the 6 states right here. A letter addressed to Georgia is suspected of also containing the extremely dangerous drug that honestly really should be considered poison. The Justice Department and the FBI, they are now investigating. CNN's Nick Valencia is following this. He's joining us now. Nick, what's the latest?
Yeah, hey there, Kate. Good to see you. Investigators are treating all of these letters as if they're linked. They were sent out at the same time, and that'll ultimately be a clue for investigators to track down who is responsible for this. In fact, earlier this morning, Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger indicated that there could be already a potential suspect that has been identified. Raffensperger, of course, the Secretary of State here in Georgia, and Fulton County may be a familiar name to a lot of our viewers. It's one of the elections offices that was targeted, and it has drawn the ire of the former president, as well as been a target for far-right conspiracy theorists, election deniers, and it was yesterday that Brad Raffensperger, he called on elected officials and political candidates to denounce this activity. And earlier this morning on CNN This Morning, he talked about how all 159 counties here in Georgia are now going to be prepared in the 2024 cycle for more suspicious activity.
We're going to make sure that we prepare all 159 counties and prepare them for events such as this. So make sure that there is Narcan available for all the election offices that do receive, incoming mail, and train them in the use of that.
There are some crazy people out there who will go to any extreme to disrupt, interrupt fair, open, transparent elections in our country. It's my personal belief that this is just probably a forerunner to what we can be prepared for in 2024.
You know, Georgia officials being very full-throated at a press conference yesterday. That was Fulton County Commissioner Rob Pitts, and likely because Fulton County has been the target of harassments and threats towards election workers, poll workers here. You remember Shay Moss and Ruby Freeman. They were targeted by far-right conspiracy theorists, so it is certainly a concern here in Georgia and beyond. You're having several states that have been targeted by these letters, and of course, Kate, all of this happening amid a backdrop of threats and political intimidation against election officials nationwide. Kate.
Yeah, Nick, thank you so much for putting it all together and following this for us. Let's talk more about this. Joining us right now is retired FBI Supervisory Special Agent Dan Bruner. It's good to have you back in, Dan. Let's talk about this. So they've got multiple investigations that federal authorities have right now. The FBI, what will they, should they, and are they, do you think, doing in this moment to track down the people behind these suspicious letters?
Good morning, Kate. Thanks. The FBI in all these 6 different states, but most importantly, probably all 56 divisions, are aware and are prepared for this sort of incident. This is not a new incident to them. Unfortunately, we go back to the 2003 Ricin case. I was involved in an investigation in 2010, a very similar incident in New Jersey. They are going to be working very closely with the postal inspectors. They are going to be getting all that material to Quantico, to the labs, to be tested. They will be looking at the stamps, at the DNA. They will look at fibers. They're going to try and determine the origin of the envelopes, where they were purchased, the point of entry of where they entered the postal line with the postal inspectors. Each one of these things, each one of these are clues towards the investigation. Most likely FBI headquarters is going to be coordinating all 6 divisions and getting them all together and getting all the material so that if there's one division which has one clue and then Georgia has another one, they'll be brought together so that there's one repository, one person, and one organization, one unit at headquarters that is going to bring it all together. They're looking for identifiers. They're going to work with the FBI Behavioral Analysis Unit at Quantico. They're going to look at the way the letters were written, what type of language was used to try and indicate who may have been the person who wrote the letters. The indications may additionally lead to more leads. The fact that there are far left organization symbology on there may be something that is going to throw them off. My gut instinct says that it's a little bit too much of them trying to claim responsibility. And in fact, that Fulton County was targeted as well specifically also leads me to believe that it could be. But most importantly, the FBI and the U.S. Postals will not leave any lead unturned,
Yeah.
and they're going to look at both directions.
And not making any assumption, right? I mean, they just go after they first follow the leads, and then they'll figure out kind of the more of the motivation. So you mentioned ricin, and when you hear suspicious letters, you think of ricin, you think of anthrax scares. You don't necessarily think of fentanyl. And the fact that you've in Washington State, they detected fentanyl in the letter. And you mentioned Fulton County, Georgia. It's suspected that fentanyl, the letter could contain fentanyl. What we know about fentanyl is just how deadly it is. What, a few grains of table salt equivalent of fentanyl can be lethal. It's a drug. I generally think that we should be calling it a poison. What do you think of this, I don't know, this evolution? That now that they're putting fentanyl in letters like this?
Well, it's something that the FBI hazmat teams are prepared for. I am not an FBI hazmat expert. There are plenty of FBI agents who are extremely knowledgeable, and they work with Homeland Security. They work with all the other hazmat teams, state and local agencies, so they're prepared for this type of incident. I think that having fentanyl changes the envelope, changes the perspective of how this will be addressed. I don't know if the amounts were deadly enough to cause damage, to be aerosolized to the individual who's opening. Obviously, as the Georgia Secretary of State just stated, this is going to change the election process, but it's not going to halt it. I think everyone's going to adapt. I think all 56 FBI divisions are going to work with all their state partners in preparing their election officials, in getting them understanding of how to open the mail-in ballots. I think that's going to change the election in 2024 versus how it was in 2020. All these mail-in ballots are going to have to be looked at with a little bit more scrutiny, a little bit more testing. But I think that the goal of these individuals is not going to stop the process.
It's also just a scary new tentacle of the terrifying scourge that fentanyl is in all communities. Now this is kind of like a new avenue and a new horrific use that fentanyl is being put to use for. Dan, thanks for coming in. Appreciate your time.
Joining us now is Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger. Sir, we appreciate your time. You talked about this yesterday. There were still a lot of details that seemed somewhat unclear. Do you have more insight into these letters, who they were addressed to, and what they said?
For Georgia, not yet. What we have been informed by the postal officials is that there's a letter in transit. So it's a 3 to 5 day transit through their system. And so obviously they'll try and intersect that when it comes to the Atlanta processing facility. But it hasn't arrived to Georgia yet, so we don't know if it will be intercepted. And that's why we prepared staff at the Fulton County Election Office. If it does actually make it through the system and it arrives, this is what you would do and this is how you'd handle it.
How do you know that it's in, what's the information that lets you know it's in transit? How do officials know that?
The postal official has some capabilities, I guess, that they don't talk about much, but somehow they have a tracking. And based on what they saw in other locations, they identified that there was another letter that was obviously postmarked for Georgia.
And you haven't heard of any suspects or who may have sent these at this point, right?
Not at this time, no. Understand from just readings that they do have identified potential suspect, but yeah, they're going to keep that very close to their chest.
More broadly, the Fulton County Commissioner said this is, quote, probably a forerunner for what we could see in 2024. Do you think that's accurate?
We're going to make sure that we prepare all 159 counties and prepare them for events such as this. So make sure that there is Narcan available for all the election offices that do receive, incoming mail, and train them in the use of that. So we'll be doing that in the next election conference that we have coming up in December.
Can I ask you, the idea that you need to make sure that your election officials have Narcan available, would you have expected that when you got into this job?
No, there's a lot of things I wouldn't have expected when I got this job. I ran just to get new voting machines with a verifiable paper ballot, and we did that. But we've been throwing a lot of curve balls, and this is just extremely distressing to think this is where some people would go and how some people would behave, and threatening people just doing their job, making sure we have fair and honest elections.